Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, the UK's largest professional union for prison, correctional and secure psychiatric workers with over 30,000 members. In this special episode, we talk to POA activist Sally Jameson. Sally is chair of her POA branch in Doncaster and has also recently been selected to fight the parliamentary seat of Doncaster Central for Labour in the next general election. Sally tells us how her work as a prison officer is integral to the values of public service and decent pay and conditions that she wants to take into Parliament, and how her union and political activities strongly support each other. Sally Jameson, thank you very much for joining us on the POA podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You have been recently adopted as the Labour Party's candidate for Doncaster Central in the next general election, whenever it is held. So I suppose the starting point is, why do you want to be an MP? What are the values that you will bring to that role?
Well, obviously I want to be a voice for our prison service and speak up for prison staff, not just on issues of things like pay, but also around the POA's national campaign to reduce the retirement age from 68, which is absolutely absurd. I think anyone that's had anything to do with the prison service knows that a retirement age of 68 for operational grades is just ridiculous. So obviously I want to champion all of those issues that affect us and be that authentic voice of experience. But actually, it's a bit more than that as well, because when you look at what's happening to public services, but also people who are generally in other workplaces on relatively low pay, and you look at what's happening with the current cost of living crisis, I just think to myself, things could be different. And a lot of the things that the government are doing today are political choices. And I want to be part, obviously, of a Labour government that's delivering something different. I look at our policy on the Great British Energy Company, which we would introduce in power, which would be a publicly owned energy company. It would have big investment in the development of renewable technology. So that would create high skill, high wage jobs all over the country. It would drive down energy bills because we'd be making our own renewable energy. It would give us a sense of national security because we wouldn't be reliant on anyone else. These kinds of policies that are really innovative and not only create new industries in our country, but would also help people everywhere, not just to drive down the bills, but to give new employment opportunities, I think is actually the real difference. But it's not just that, it's things like free breakfast for all primary school children, it's insulating 19 million homes. These are all things that could be done by a different government. And I want to be a part of that because I've got a vision of a country where everyone shares in the success and that tackles the big issues of the day, whether that's climate change, whether that's energy bills, or whether that's creating a new way for Britain in a post-Brexit era. Being
an MP, though, is not something that even occurs to most people. What made you become aware that this was a possibility and then seek and secure the nomination?
Well, I've been involved with the Labour Party for over a decade now. I think I was 17 or 18 when I first joined and started campaigning. And I've been involved in lots of campaigns all over the country, lots of different elections. So it's been, in truth, a really big part of my life. And it was actually when I met my MP, Rosie Winterton, when I was around 18, and she really kind of inspired me to get involved and attend those first meetings. So it's always been something that's been there. Everyone that knows me knows that I've been really active in the Labour Party, even when I've lived in different places. And so when Rosie announced she was standing down, she wouldn't be standing at the next election, I gave it a lot of thought because obviously it's a big step. It's a completely different change of direction in terms of career, and you're putting yourself out there in the public sphere, often to get a lot of abuse, particularly when you're a woman candidate. And so I gave it a lot of thought, but actually I decided, really for all the reasons that I just outlined, that it is something I want to do and something I want to be a part of. And essentially the Labour Party advertised the post on its website and via email, and then I just applied. And then there's a long listing process from that, and then I was interviewed by the local selection committee and put on the shortlist. Then I got nominations from different unions and local branches. And then it all kind of ended in a hustings with me and the rest of the shortlisted candidates. And I gave a speech and answered some questions, and I was selected from there. So it's quite a long and intense process, I'm not going to lie. But, I'm really pleased I've done it and to have got to this point.
Wow, I mean, that requires real stamina as well as kind of belief in certain values. It's a very different kind of world and a very different kind of pathways in many ways to being a prison officer. But what was it that motivated you to join the prison service?
Well, I think, like a lot of people, I've always been very intrigued by what happens in prisons, because it is a very kind of hidden behind the gates and behind the prison walls environment. And so it's always something that's really interested me. And I think when I was looking for a job, I was about sort of 25 at that point. And I remember just thinking, I'd done it before. I didn't want another job that was sort of 9 to 5 in an office without any excitement. I wanted to do something a bit more than that. And I think I've always been interested in what goes on there. And so I just applied, and it is quite a long vetting process between when you apply and when you actually start in the prison. So I did have a lot of time to think about it, and I wobbled a couple of times. But in the end, I just actually, this is a chance to do something a bit different. And, I liked being in the uniform discipline service as well, and working in the public services. And I've absolutely loved it. I've loved every minute. I've had no regrets going in. I would always encourage other people to do so, even though it can be really challenging. But yeah, it's probably a mixture of intrigue and wanting to do something a bit different that got me involved in it in the first place.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I mean, has the reality of the job varied from what you thought it would be like, either in a good way or a bad way?
In a sense, all the things that you hear about prison, they do tend to happen. But I think it's just very different when you're there, and you get a different perspective on things that go on in a prison, and you get, I think, a bit of a different perspective on crime and what motivates people to get involved in criminal activity as well. And so I think it just gives you a different idea, and it definitely will stick with me forever, really, that prison officers do an incredibly difficult job, and they do it very well. And it's a very specific set of skills that you've got to have and develop. And I think if you can manage being a prison officer, you can pretty much do anything, because there is nothing that you won't be challenged with in that job.
Tell us about your POA journey then. So you joined the prison service. Obviously, who or what encouraged you to join the union, and how did you end up as chair of the branch?
Well, obviously, I would always join a union in whatever workplace I was in. That goes without say. So I was straight in the POA from the first day of training, more or less. And then when I started the job properly, I was working as a prison officer. The local committee there, I knew them all, and one of them was standing down, and so a committee position came up. So I put myself forward. I was voted on, thankfully, and so then I started as a committee member and started doing the training for that role and representing staff and being part of the health and safety negotiations. And then the chair of the branch retired, and so that position came up, and I think, frankly, I was the only one on the committee that wanted to do it. No one else wants to be chair, because anyone that knows anything about being on the POA committee knows that it's a lot of work and it's not always very nice. So I don't think anyone else really wanted it. And so then I became chair of the branch. And I think I was maybe about 2.5 years into the job by that point when I became chair. So it was a bit of a steep learning curve, because I didn't have that much prison experience myself. But obviously, I've kind of had a little bit of union involvement before, so I knew the crack. But yeah, it's been a steep learning curve, but I've really enjoyed it. And actually, I think we at Moorland have a strong committee. They're really great, and we're a really good team. So yeah, that's really how I got into it, really by accident more than anything else. It wasn't intention. It was just positions became available, and I stood, essentially.
What you say about it being a team, the committee being a team, is really important, because that strength of solidarity and support and pooling your knowledge and experience is what makes for the most effective kind of union units. I would say. But in what way does your union work and your political work in what way do they support each other? Do they support each other?
Well, obviously, because the POA is affiliated to the Labour Party, so there's not a direct link there. But I think that definitely the values that I have that are informed by my Labour Party values definitely play a part in wanting to see people treated fairly when I'm acting as a union rep, and making sure everyone gets their voice heard. And specifically in relation to things like pay and retirement age as well, I think it's really important that as a union, we're fighting for that kind of fairness and fighting to make sure that people are paid properly, but also aren't expected to work to the ground. certainly in our service. So they kind of inform each other that way. And definitely for me personally, the trade union values and the Labour Party values are very much interlinked. So that's something that I take with me in everything that I do.
And what would your message be to fellow POA members who might be listening to this and just think, politicians, they're all the same. Politics has nothing to do with me. What would be your message about the importance of political engagement?
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely imperative that everyone's politically engaged, particularly in our service, and gets involved, because I think that the big things that are affecting prison officers at the minute, whether that's their pay rise being completely swallowed by inflation, whether that's the retirement age, whether that's the erosion of terms and conditions over the last decade or so, all of these things are political choices, and all of these things are decisions that are made at a government and ministerial level. And so if you want to influence that, if you want to see the kind of changes in those areas, you've got to vote. But actually, it's also really important that as a union, we have solidarity together and are fighting at that top table. And I know that's what the POA do, fighting for us and all the members across the country at those top levels to make sure our voice is heard and that we're part of those negotiations. And so you can't have a union and not be political, because if you're not, you're just out of the conversation. And it's really important that we're in that. But again, it is more than that. And as I said really at the beginning of this, everything that goes on that affects our lives is political, whether that's the energy bills, whether that's things that are happening in education or in other public services with the NHS. All of these things are political choices. And so being engaged with that is really important, because if you don't go out there, you don't go vote, you don't have your voice heard, actually nothing will ever change. So my message would be to get involved, to make sure you vote, and to join a union.
Sally, thanks very much for spending time with us, and best of luck in the period leading up to the election and, of course, at the election itself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Political activity is just one of the ways in which the POA works hard to get the very best deal for its members. Find out more about the full range of union activities by visiting poauk.org.uk. Thank you for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this special edition and will join us for the next POA podcast episode. Thank you and goodbye.